thanks for taking the time to sit down with me and show me your awesome tank here.
Pleasure.
To get started, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself and tell us about your tank and how long it's been running.
I'm Jason Wilson. This tank's been running for 4 years, since February 2018.
How big is it? How many gallons?
It's just under 300 gallons. It's a custom tank from Crystal Dynamics in California, Southern California.
San Diego?
San Diego, yeah. And that's about it.
Awesome. How did you get into the hobby in general?
Weird story. My mother was here from Australia. She house sat for us, and she accidentally killed my wife's betta fish. So I bought her a new one, and then I started getting interested in aquariums myself. So I have a freshwater tank as well, which is in the other room, and saltwater just kept growing.
Awesome. And what size tank did you start with? How did you get to this one?
I had a 12-gallon first, which is stupid to start with. That went okay. It had its issues, and then I moved up to a 50-gallon with a separate refugium, and then I had that for maybe 1 or 2 years, and then upgraded to this guy.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about the equipment you're running. Lights, what kind of nutrient export you have, nutrient control, and any type of other equipment you have.
From top to bottom, the lights are Chinese lights, Ocean Revives, which I converted to be Wi-Fi controllable and programmable. And there's 2 Reef actinic strips at the front, just for supplementation down the front of the tank. As far as nutrient export goes, I inject lanthanum chloride into the skimmer. I do that rarely. That's probably every few weeks, just to maintain. But I run a GFO reactor for phosphate and a
Carbon?
No. I run a sulfur reactor in there as well, which I honestly don't know how much of a difference it's making, but nitrate stays pretty stable.
Okay. So, and I know you're running a skimmer and UV as well, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it's running a 60 watt UV.
Okay.
And that runs just after lights out.
After lights out. What do you give us a rough idea of what your parameters are?
Between 0.5 and 1 for phosphate, between 10 and 25 for nitrate, magnesium's around 1390. What else is there? pH sits at between 8.1 and 8.3, and
Calcium,
calcium I keep at 450, and mag is, like I said, 1390. And elk is at 8.6, 8.7.
I know controller-wise, you're running the Apex and the Trident as well, is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Awesome. How many times a day is the Trident testing for you?
It's testing 6 times a day
Okay.
at the moment. And I back up test that manually every Monday as well, just to make sure that it's staying on track as well. And it takes a bit of maintenance as well to keep it accurate, like cleaning solenoids and things like that, because you will notice over time that it will float.
Awesome. I notice you do run a refugium as well.
Yep.
Right. Is that after lights are out that you have that light on as well?
No, the lights run. There's a 3-hour break before lights come on with no lights. So other than that, the rest of the time it's on.
Okay. Sounds good. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the inhabitants in the tank? Let's start with the fish.
Well, where are they all?
I know you said you have about maybe 25 or so?
Yeah, there's about 25, 30 fish in there. Everything's fully quarantined. The tank, to my knowledge, doesn't have any fish parasites or disease.
Okay.
Touch wood.
Any favorites of the bunch?
I think the copper band is probably my favorite. He's when cleaning the sand, he's not shy. He's always right at the turkey baster, trying to get pods and all that kind of stuff. But the flamenquis are pretty awesome fish too.
Yeah.
It's hard to have favorites.
Awesome. Have you had most of the fish or have you had any of the fish from previous tanks?
Yeah, I have a marine beta in here, which he's probably asleep at the moment. I've had him for about 7 years.
Awesome.
And, it's a tough fish.
All right. Well, let's go with some coral. Is there any particular corals that you find to be your favorite of the bunch?
That's a funny. No, I actually don't. But just the concept of having a coherent, flowing aquascape with corals that kind of complement each other and nothing kind of sticks out too much.
Yeah.
My goal was to have it to look as natural as possible in an aquarium.
You definitely have that with putting some coral on top of coral, I see.
I didn't do that. Yes, there's acros and gonis and things like that growing on top of corals here too. So.
Awesome. Well, you definitely have a well-maintained tank here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your maintenance routine?
Maintenance is during the week. It's not a lot. It's 5 minutes here and there, other than feeding and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Saturdays I'll probably spend maybe 3 hours. Cleaning as much as I can, changing the GFO, water change, general glass maintenance, and trimming any corals that might need it.
Yeah. What about, did you say water changes once a week? And
yeah.
Blasting the sand once a week as well?
Yeah, I blow out the sand bed, get rid of detritus, and that all gets caught in the socks, and then I do the water change. It's about 30 gallons a week.
Okay. Have you had any major issues with the tank other than, kind of standard fare issues?
I have lost a few pretty large colonies of acro due to bacterial infections.
Okay.
And I used a few techniques to fix that. One was the witch hazel.
Mm-hmm.
So I used witch hazel, and it seemingly was successful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it was the witch hazel killing the bad bacteria and me dosing with good bacteria.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that did it, or is just the bacteria dosing that fixed the situation.
Okay.
So either way it worked, and I did a little later on, probably a year later, had another bout and lost a few more big colonies of acro. But it's been pretty stable now for about a year.
Awesome. Now I know you said you quarantine fish. Do you have any protocol with dipping corals or anything like that?
First thing is I never put frag plugs in the tank. And I dip and look under bright light with a magnifying glass, remove anything that looks like eggs or anything like that. And so far so good. There's no flatworms, or I have not seen a pest in here yet.
I know some of let's go with live rock versus dry rock. Did you start your tank with live rock or dry rock?
This one I started with dry rock, and it had, I used a couple of live rock pieces from my previous tank in there, and I wish that I didn't, because it has vermitid snails in the tank, which is the only pest that is in there, but they have not really been a problem.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them, but they're small and they don't seem to hurt anything.
Yeah.
As far as tank stability and bacteria goes, I think you have a longer maturation period with dry rock before acros will start growing fast and the general health of the tank becomes more stable.
Yeah. Did you supplement I think you mentioned it with your maintenance, but to prevent or overcome that by dosing with bacteria pretty often is probably your best bet?
Yeah, I dose bacteria weekly with water changes, and that also has helped keep nitrates more stable and slightly lower. But other than that, it's really just about consistency and always keeping the same habits, and if something's wrong, don't skip it.
Yeah. With such a large tank, have you had any issues dialing in things like flow or lighting?
Lighting, not so much. I found flow to be a lot more important than lighting. This tank has 2 gyres at each end, and then at the back of the tank there's another 2 gyres vertical, because the back of the tank is open, and so there's a lot of flow at the back of the tank. And then 2 MP10s and a Nero 5, which they're basically just there to mix up the flow. And so while the flow is probably not as strong as some SPS units would have, there's a lot of flow, and it's very mixed.
In regards to feeding, I know you mentioned you feed your fish pretty often. How often do you feed them? What do you feed them? And do you feed your corals anything?
I don't feed corals anything other than AB Plus from Red Sea. I've noticed quite a big difference feeding that. So that's basically aminos and that kind of stuff. I feed the fish like a good chunk of mysis, like frozen mysis, every morning, which is mainly for the smaller fish that wake up earlier than the bigger fish. And then throughout the day, there's 4 to 5 feedings of the auto feeder, just small amounts going to the tank, and then a large feed of frozen food, so clams, shrimp, squid, all that kind of stuff.
I know we all seem to have them, but if you happen to have one, do you have any kryptonite corals, or for whatever reason, a coral you've tried to keep in this tank but you just can't for whatever reason?
Yeah, Duncans.
Okay.
It's got to be the easiest coral, but I had a colony of Duncans from my previous tank, which was huge. It was about 30 heads. It got into this tank, and after 6 months or so, it took a dive and completely died. And then, so I have another very small colony in there at the moment, and that's been there 2 years, and it looks like crap still. So I don't know what the problem is.
Yeah, that's interesting. It always seems to be one coral or another with someone that, for whatever reason, the tank just doesn't accept it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was getting nipped by a fish, but I don't think it is.
Yeah. What is some advice that you would give to a new hobbyist just getting into the hobby?
I guess I would say learn testing. Learn what parameters you're looking to keep stable, and test as much as you possibly can, and then make very small adjustments as you go. The reason being is it gives you a feel of the rhythm of your tank. Your tank's parameters are not going to be the same as on a Monday as they are on a Friday. So testing regularly gives you a general feel, and you'll see how your corals behave according to what your levels are.
Definitely.
So yeah, you end up getting a visual representation as well.
Yeah, I've definitely found that testing often, and if you can, at the same time every day, really helps too. Because if you test at a different time, there's going to be fluctuations throughout each day that kind of come into play as well.
Exactly. But things like nitrate, if you test often enough, you can just slightly adjust your feeding to keep that stable. So
yeah. Have you had any pest algae when you first started the tank? Did you have an ugly phase at all?
Yeah, the ugly phase was crazy bad. It was I want to say it's green hair algae, but it was a red-brown color. I'm not exactly sure what that's called. But
the fish just wouldn't take to it, or?
The fish hated it. Not even the tangs would eat it.
Huh.
And that was, I think that's part of every tank, but I think it was particularly bad because I used dry rock. It's Bucani.
Yeah. Yeah, there definitely seems to be some kind of correlation between dry rock and possibly an uglier face for some people, but every tank's different.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's bacteria, building up a stable colony or what, but I used a few different techniques as far as the refugium, a little hydrogen peroxide. That works in the way where if you inject hydrogen peroxide in small areas at the base of the hair algae, it'll dissolve it. But then you have to make sure you remove that nutrients with a a refugium or an algae scrubber or something like that.
Awesome. So last question, pertaining SPS, since that seems to be kind of where I'm gravitating towards these days. What advice would you give to someone who's possibly, they've had LPS and soft corals and they're kind of wanting to test the waters and jump into that SPS realm?
I would say get a cheap piece and put it somewhere where the flow is adequate for that piece, and just keep an eye on it. And the key is making sure that everything is stability, not just alk. You got to make sure calcium, nitrate, and phosphate. Like phosphate on this tank will change dramatically over a day. So keeping all that stable is critical. And I use probably, well, I guess like for phosphate, I use lanthanum chloride and GFO at the same time.
Yeah.
So where I'll use a slightly underpowered GFO reactor, and then when I'm testing, if it's slightly higher, I reduce that with lanthanum chloride, and that seems to keep things pretty stable.
When dosing lanthanum, do you usually do like just a small percentage of the recommended dose? Because I have heard some people have issues with certain fish, like tangs and wrasses, to be particular about it.
I use a very small amount, and I would dose directly into the skimmer, but break the daily amount up into like 1 ml doses.
I think some people have mentioned too, when you dose it, do you need to run like a finer filter saw kind of thing?
I do. Like when I dose it, I run 10 micro. But I'm not sure if you actually have to. I know some people who just do very small doses throughout the day into their skimmer, and that seems to take care of any lanthanum staying in the water column.
Awesome. All right, Jason, well, I appreciate your time and letting me in your home and checking out your tank.
It's a pleasure.
Is there any last words you'd like to say?
Happy reefing.